Hello and welcome to my little shed in Guernsey where we're building a beach buggy. If you've been following up until now, you know exactly where we are in the project. If you've just stumbled across this video, go back to the beginning and hopefully you'll find your way to this point later on. In this episode, we're going to be working mainly on wheels and tyres, which is a huge part of any project because I'm a firm believer that wheels and tyres can make or break any vehicle. So these ones have been anything other than straightforward, put it that way. Before we do that, we've got a couple of other bits and bobs to do. We've got to get all the brake drums and everything painted and mounted. But before we do that, we're going to pick up where we left off with painting some front end components. And a good reason to stick around to the end of this video is we've got the results of the competition for the Tamiya Lunchbox radio controlled car. So if you entered that, stick around to the end because you might have won a prize. So that's enough chatting. Let's get on with building a beach buggy. Well, apologies for not filming too much of that painting that I just did, but it started raining ever so slightly while I was doing it, so I quick grabbed the old parasol there, which hasn't been put up in about 2 years, chucked it over where I was working, quickly got some paint on my bits and put them all in here. So how's this for a bomb site? I've just been running around like a lunatic. So shocks primed, steering damper primed, tie rods primed, tie rod ends primed and painted gloss black, same with the brake drums, and yeah, look at all this wonderful mess. Makes me feel uneasy having a workshop as all over the place as this. There we go, nice coat of gloss black on there. Now I'm going to put them inside very quickly because it looks like it's about to pour it down. Perfect timing. Okay, we're just doing a bit of work on the tie rod ends. You'll see that I've stripped them all back and painted them. Even though they're brand new, they come with that crappy black finish on them that doesn't last 5 minutes. So what I've done is replaced all the hardware with stainless nuts. So we got stainless left hand thread nuts for those, which are a little bit of a nightmare to find, but we found some. I've got some stainless nylocks as well to go on that end. The way that I like to do these is strip them back with a wire wheel in a grinder, because obviously you can't sandblast them or anything like that because it's all going to get into the mechanism of it. Another good reason for doing it this way, I like to take these little grease caps off because they're always pretty stingy with the grease on them, so it gives you a chance to get in there and, you know, really lube them up. So get some of that stuff, dollop it in there, more the merrier. Then we can slide our little rubber cover back on there. It all oozes out the side and goes everywhere, but that's good. We know that it's completely packed full then, so I can just squeeze it over. It's just going to fart a little bit like that. Look. So that's completely packed now. Wipe off the excess, and the tricky bit, which I won't film because it's difficult enough to do it, you know, normally, let alone having a camera in front of your face, is stretching that part over there, which if you're very careful, you can do it with a set of long nose pliers. Obviously we need to be careful not to puncture that little rubber cover there. So yeah, got 2 down, 2 more to go, and that's another bit done. Just in case you don't know how this type of tie rod works, because there are quite a few different types. See, it's got sort of slots cut in the end there and a taper on it, and then that nut, which isn't actually threaded, it's just got a tapered portion on the inside, that goes on there. And then obviously you thread your tie rod into there, and this is a lock nut, which is basically, if you tighten these against each other, it forces this one without the threads on it down onto that taper and then locks it down on those threads there. These are the nuts that came with it. Obviously we don't want that mild steel rubbish on there going rusty, so I got some stainless nuts and chucked them in the lathe and just machined out that little taper in there. So like I say, that goes on there. This one's a left hand thread, so spin that into there, And then we've got some pretty nicely detailed tie rods, which again, it's not something that people spend a lot of time on usually, but if we're going to do a job, we're going to do a proper job. Easy as that. Okay, that's some more of the steering bits put on, so that's all our tie rods on, all nicely detailed. Just got the steering damper left to go. I'm just going to do something a little bit different with that end, so I'll show you that later on. We're going to put some drums on so we can get one step closer to putting the thing on its wheels. So what we're going to need to do that, first of all, we're obviously going to need the drums themselves, which were, I bought these as blank drums. They were undrilled, so no holes. You might notice that the front ones are 4-bolt, the rear ones are 5-bolt. Very good explanation for that, so we'll get to that later on. I've left the mating surface of the wheel there in bare metal. Not completely necessary, but it's just something I wanted to do. Very easy for me to do as well, because being a sign writer by trade, I was able to just make a vinyl stencil to stick on there, so when we demask that, ends up with a nice circle. So we're going to bang the back ones on first, which are those ones. So what we're going to need, a little bit of copper grease for the splines. Put that down there. And we're going to need some mounting hardware as well, which is all stashed in here. So we've got, that's the nuts for the back ones. That's our wheel bearings for the front ones, so we're going to need those next. Look at that, oh, new old stock 50s indicator stalk, lovely. Stop getting distracted. Right, let's get these drums on. Right, the back ones are about as simple as it gets, but one thing that is definitely worth doing is a little bit of copper grease in the splines, because once these drums have been on there for a long time, they can seize on there and they are a nightmare to get off. And I had exactly that with this particular drum when I was stripping down the car. It was like it was welded on there. So we just about got it off with a homemade hub puller that I might show you later. And yeah, hopefully we don't ever have to deal with that again. So bit of that in the splines. Wipe it off because it's got a habit of getting absolutely everywhere, that stuff. Then it is as simple as just sliding that onto the splines, getting it just over the brake shoes. Oh, lovely. Nice big castle nut on there. And then I'll talk that to spec later on, because it's going to be a lot easier to do once the thing is on its wheels and it's got a motor in it and things aren't trying to rotate as I'm talking them up. So that's the back ones done. On to the front ones. Next up, it's time to get the front ones on. What you need to do with these is there's a smaller wheel bearing for the outside, bigger one on the inside. So that bearing race needs to be tapped or pressed into there. Same on the back, bigger one on that side. That'll go in there and be tapped all the way flush. You can tap them in with a socket if you've got one that fits absolutely perfectly. I'm not a big fan of doing that because it's steel on steel, any damage to these and you might as well throw them in the bin. So I'm going to make up a little piece of aluminium just to drift in there, because what's the point in having a lathe if you can't do stuff like that? So let's see what we got in here. Nothing, that sort of steel and whatnot. Those are bits of aluminium, that'd work. But actually, that is an old bicycle hub that I made for my electric bike. That's version 1 and we've got version 2 on the bike now, and this one's a bit knackered and we don't need that. So hopefully that, yeah, that's going to work. You're going in the lathe, Sonny Jim. Well, there we go. After a few minutes in the lathe, we got ourselves a custom bearing punch. You can buy off the shelf ones with different sizes of end on them, but for the amount I'd use, it's not really worth it. And also, I just knock up something like that in a few minutes. So I've just done the other side, and it's worked like a charm. So we'll do the same on this side. I'll show you exactly what's what. Take that out of there. We've got a little seal to go in afterwards as well. So we'll start with the smaller one on the outside. So I've already given it a wipe in there, make sure it's nice and clean. Get that started off as straight as we can. Then that can go in there. Also, because I don't want to whack the top end of that and sort of damage it, this seemed to work fine on the other side, so just basically put that in there so I can give that a wallop. Right, got a bit of plywood under my drum there so I don't put a dent in my workbench. Now wait for the noise to change, and that's when we know we're fully bottomed out. There we go. That is all the way in. So same on the inside, on the bigger one. Again, make sure there's no debris in there anywhere. Drop that little guy in there, then that, and our little bolt in the top. Lovely, and I'm sure we'll use that for something else another day. Peanut, come here. Hello. Come say hello. Come on. Come here. Come on. Who's a good dog? Right, now that the bearing races are pressed in, it's time to grease up the bearings and get them in there. So what I'll do is get a dollop of that, which is specific bearing grease, you know, designed for wheel bearings and whatnot. So we'll put a bit of that in there, and then it's a messy way of doing it, but it's the best way of doing it. It's getting a big dollop of that in the palm of your hand and working it into the bearing from every angle you can. The idea is to pack all the voids in there with grease to make them last as long as possible, and drop big dollops of it on the bench like I just did there. So we'll get it in there, rotate it around a couple of times, and then again scoop up everything I can to really try and maximise the amount I get in there. That is sufficiently greasy.
My God, you're greasy.
Plop her in there. Then we've got the little seal that goes in. That's just a press fit. So we'll press that in there. And also give it a, what we'll do, if I take that glove off. Little tap with the dead blow hammer. And that's in there. It's exactly the same process for that one. Alright, putting the front ones on, pretty straightforward. I'll just whip that off, which you might remember from a few episodes ago. Stuff like that, if you don't want it to go rusty, I just coat a load of grease on it and stick a plastic bag over the top. And that is all greased up and ready to go. So I'm just going to carefully slide that over the spindle, being careful not to knock that little bearing out. That's all happy there. Our little washers can go on. So slot is in the back there. And then we got these cool little nuts with a little Allen key bolt in there to clamp it on as well. So the right hand side is right hand thread, the left hand one is left hand thread. So if you're doing this yourself, don't forget that and accidentally cross thread it. Then we got a 24mm spanner, yeah. And the way to adjust these is to tighten it up so that it feels a bit too tight, then back it off slightly. But a really good way to know you're in the right spot is just get in there with a little screwdriver, and you want to just be able to just move that washer just back and forth slightly. That's when you know you're at about the right tension. Then all we got to do is whiz up those Allen bolts, put the grease caps on, and we're done. Okay, it's time to talk about wheels. Now we've got those brake drums on there, we need to get some wheels and tyres on there. Now this has been, to be honest, for me, a massive part of the project because I'm extremely fussy when it comes to wheels and tyres, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less than, you know, something I was really, really happy with. So it's ended up being a very expensive, very complicated, pain in the backside, but that's how you end up with something that you're really pleased with in the end. So I think it's worth it. Now, most people on a beach buggy will run 15-inch wheels on the front and the back, whether those are alloy wheels, you know, mags or steel wheels. They're usually 15s front and back. But if you go back to the beginning of these things, they were actually designed to have 14s on the front and 15s on the back. If you look at the first ones that Bruce Meyers built back in the day, the way they used to do this was with early split screen bus wheels on the front and Beetle wheels on the back. So the Beetle wheels are 15s, the early split bus ones are 14s. Now, that's been done a million times. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but there's a couple of things about those that I'm not particularly fond of. It's just me being extremely fussy. One of those things is that the front wheels, the early bus wheels, the center of them isn't solid. It's got sort of 4 little vents in between the rim and the center. Not a big deal to most people, but that sort of thing really annoys me, and I can't quite explain why. The other thing is that because the size of the wheel is small, you know, it's 14-inch instead of 15, the standard size Volkswagen hubcap is pretty big, and it takes up almost the entire center of that wheel. Again, for most people, not a problem, but it's just something I didn't particularly like the look of. I also don't want to run hubcaps with a Volkswagen logo on them. I just want smooth or baby moon style hubcaps. So what I've ended up with after, honestly, countless hours of research trying to find a matching and 14 and 15-inch set of wheels, which is, I can assure you, pretty impossible. What I found was 15-inch wheels from Wheel Vintiques in the US. They do a solid style wheel. You can see I've already had these banded, so they've been widened again because I couldn't get them in the right offsets, you know, so I couldn't get the back spacing right. The front ones are 14s. I'm not actually going to tell you what these are from because it took me absolutely forever to try and find something that was going to work. Now, these have also been banded, and you'll see that they are a different style wheel, but by the time there's a hubcap in there, the bit that you see is actually going to look just how I want it to. Now, there's no provisions on these for mounting hubcaps, but I've got a little bit of a plan for that, so that's going to come up later on, and it also explains why we've got 4-bolt wheels on the front and 5-bolt on the back, which, again, doesn't bother me because we've got hubcaps going over there. That's going to completely cover that, no problem at all. That's just the wheels. Now, nobody where I live will ban steel wheels. I thought about doing it myself, but there is a place in the UK, so short boat ride away, 3 hours on the boat. A guy in Devon, his company is called Banded Steel Wheels. Now, he is a wizard when it comes to this stuff. He did some for the back of my brother's Dodge Dart, and we were super impressed with the work that he did. So I knew he was the man for the job. Another good reason for me using him is because I needed to go to the UK to pick the tyres up as well. Even though the tyres have come from Missouri, where I live, Guernsey, Channel Islands, little island in between England and France, I'm sure I've told you that before, I couldn't actually get the tyres shipped directly to Guernsey. So I had them sent to my mate Tom in Cornwall. He looked after those for a couple of days for me, so I kind of I used it as an excuse to go on a little bit of a holiday actually and go and hang out in Tom's garage because he's got some super cool stuff in there. There's the shoebox. There's my tyres. Just a Model A sedan body kicking about there. That's the best bit. One of my favourite cars. So I dropped the wheels off to be banded, went to Tom's, picked the tyres up, then went back on the way back to the boat, picked up the wheels. So that makes it sound a lot more straightforward than it was. There was a lot of hurdles and roadblocks in the way, but we finally got it done. Now, onto the tyres. This is part that I'm really, really excited about because, again, wheels and tyres, super fussy about those. Now, I spent a lot more money on these than I was hoping to, but once I've got something in my head and I want it, I do it. So here's what we've ended up with. Actually, I'll show you the front ones first. They are Goodyear Polyglass, which is about as traditional as you can get when it comes to a beach buggy. Also what you'd find on 60s, 70s Mopars, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to tell you exactly the, you know, offsets and things for the wheels because I don't want anyone to directly copy it. You can see what size the tyres are, so that's not a problem. So that's the fronts. And that's the backs. So you can see they're pretty meaty, you know. By the time they're mounted on the rim, they're going to be a decent size. And to put it into perspective, I won't tell you exactly how much they've cost, but it is more than double what the actual beach buggy body shell cost me. And then an awful lot of money spent on shipping as well. And then, of course, a trip to the UK to go and get them. So not the most straightforward way of doing it, but I've ended up with what I want. And that's what matters. And I'm really excited about it. Look at them. They're so cool. Right. Anyway, we need to get these wheels blasted, get them painted, put the tyres on, put them on that. Then we can put it on the ground. Yes! Let's just have a little close-up look at these wheels before I get them blasted so I can show you how neat this job is. Again, Damien from Banded Steel Wheels in Devon, hero. Really, really knows what he's doing. And surprisingly cheap for what he does as well. Basically, he's got a rotating jig which will chop the rim of the wheel off. And then another jig which, once he's, you know, put the band in, tacked it all in, made sure it's all straight and true, the machine will just sit there welding it up. So really impressive setup with some awesome homemade machinery, which is right up my street. So you can see how nice the finish is on there. You know, it doesn't even need any filler. Just a little bit of primer on there. That's going to be a perfect paint job on there. And those big, lovely, fat MIG welds steamed up on there because, you know, some people worry about banding steel wheels and they think it's somehow unsafe. But a well-penetrated MIG weld is unbelievably strong. And believe it or not, wheels are welded together anyway. So it's absolutely no different to what they would do from the factory. And these things are never, ever going to fail. Those are absolutely bulletproof. So again, massive shout out to him. Thanks for the amazing service. And he does do wheels for people all over the world. He actually told me he's got a customer in Australia that will send wheels to the UK to be widened, and then he ships them back again. So that shows you how good his work is. So yeah, go check him out if you need any steel wheels banded. Super nice guy. Okie dokie, we got some freshly blasted wheels. Thanks to John from Scarred Steel for that. Turned them around in a couple of days. Well happy. If you need any blasting and you live in Guernsey, give him a shout. So those are ready to go. Nice coarse blast on them as well, which is what I like because that epoxy primer really bites into it. So I've set up a little table in my garden there, and painting wheels is always a bit of a pain because you're constantly spinning round. So something I've always wanted to make for painting wheels, just knocked that up and it took about 15 minutes. So I'm sure it's going to make life easier. See, we just got those little wheels screwed in there, bolt in the middle. I can sit it on top of there, spin it around, paint away. So got my primer, got my gun. I'm going to use my big gun for this one, the Air Gunser, or whatever it's called. But yeah, nice little gun. It's the one that I painted the chassis with, does a lovely job. So let's get some primer on there. I'm looking forward to this. There we go, that's a good few coats of primer on there. So what I'll do is I'll rub that back. I may end up giving them another coat of primer yet, just in case there's any rub throughs or anything like that. But yeah, those are all sealed now in epoxy, so I can relax. I don't like having bare metal things kicking around for too long, just in case they go rusty. So yeah, looking good. And then it was time for nobody's favourite bit of building a car, sanding. Lots and lots of sanding. Like I say, nobody really enjoys it, but it's all part of doing it. And if you want it to look good in the end, you've got to put the work in at this point. Okay, that's our wheels all flatted back, almost ready for paint. Now, this isn't a critical step, but it's something I find that really helps when you're painting steel wheels. Often you'll see a nicely painted steel wheel, and where the centre and the rim join, over the years you start to see a bit of rust creeping out of that join there. So a really good thing to do is, once it's got primer on it, is go over it with a bit of that stuff, over paintable seam sealer. So squirt a bit of that in there, and I've just made up a little tool, which is just a bit of rod with a bit of silicone tube on the end, cut at an angle there. So yeah, I just squirt a little bit in there, and then give it a bit of a smoothing off, and then wipe off any excess with a microfiber and a bit of brake cleaner, and that should future-proof that nicely. One down, 3 to go. Okay, that's the wheels totally prepped, ready for paint. There is one more job to do before I paint those, just in case I need to do any mucking about with it, and that's figure out how I'm going to mount the hubcaps. Now, the back wheels, they literally just pop in because the wheels are designed for this type of hubcap. The front wheels, as you know, are off something completely different. I've not said what they're from, but put it this way, it's pretty obscure and you probably won't guess it. These are the caps that are going on there. So they're stainless steel baby moon style caps. The only problem with them is there is obviously no way of the hubcaps to mount in there. The other thing is, you can see that's sitting proud because it's got that lip on the back, which it normally uses to seat, but we don't need that. So I've got a bit of a plan for how I'm going to do this. So you'll notice that there is a hole there in this wheel. I don't know what that was for. All I've done is drilled another one the other side, just match the position of it. So hopefully you'll figure out what I'm getting at when I've got this hopefully cunning plan to mount the hubcaps. Right, these things were expensive, so the last thing I want to do is scratch them and ding them up, so I've just covered it in tape. Other reason for that is because I've worked out I need to cut 10mm off the back of them. Now, it's a lot easier to cut to a tape line than it is a pen line. So what I've done is got my trusty scalpel, clamped it down on top of a spacer there, so we're exactly 10mm off the bench, which is nice and flat. So I can just rotate that round. Now I should be able to just peel this part off. There we go. Now I've got a nice straight line that I can trim to. Perfect. There we go. Won't be needing that bit anymore. Okay, that's that trimmed off there, so I've gone as close as I can get to that line. And one thing I've found that works really well for stuff like this is these self-adhesive discs for the old disc sander over there that you've seen me use a million times. If I just stick that down to the table, I can then we just get in there with the deburring tool. Give that a little bit of a sand up on the edge, and that's lovely, nice and straight. Right, now it's time to get crafty with some of this stuff. 25 by 3mm stainless flat bar. Some of this stuff, universal rubber edging sealing type stuff, and a bunch of nuts and bolts. So let's see what we come up with. This sounds like a time for a montage to me. Well, it's looking like this plan's going to work, which is nice. So just in case you can't get your head around it, that bit obviously bolts to the wheel. This part is going to be TIG welded just inside the hubcap there. And then it's going to basically just screw on like that. So simple solution, fair amount of work to get it done, but I'm going to be a lot happier with them mounted this way than with those poxy little clips that I've seen on some other wheels. Now that, hopefully you can see it there, is probably the tiniest TIG weld I've ever done. It's probably going to go out of focus, I've got to go so close. But yeah, that's going to work lovely. Nice! And that is the finished part. Couldn't be happier with the way that this works. So obviously that's bolted to there. That's our trimmed down hubcap with our little rubber seal on it with the crossbar welded in there. And then I'll just try and do this one-handed. So that pops onto there. And then we literally just spin it on. And it's worked out perfectly because it tightens down onto that little rubber seal against the wheel there. So we haven't even got any, you know, metal on metal contact. So that snugs up just perfect like that. So really chuffed with that. That's so much better than those daft little clips that normally hold these things on. So yeah, we shouldn't have to worry about ever losing those when we're going down the road. Awesome. Right, it's finally time to get some top coat on these wheels. So I'll take you through the process of it. It's nothing you haven't seen me do before, but it's a different colour at least. So I want to give them all a thorough degreasing, and brake cleaner works really well for that. So I'll just give them a good hose down and a good wipe off with a clean bit of paper towel. Now I'm going to do the wheels in two halves basically, so I'm going to flip them over, paint the back side first, let that dry, and then turn it over and do the front side. So I'll just give the the front a good wipe down now. Make sure I get right in that edge of that rim there. Then, because I don't want any overspray coming through from the back side to the front, just get a bit of this. And just stick it over the bolt holes and the centre hole, obviously, and my extra holes for my super cunning hubcap mounting solution. And of course, can't forget the valve hole as well. There's that there. So now I can flip it over, do the same on the other side. So again, just give it a little wipe down with this stuff. You can get specific spirit wipe for doing this, but for the amount I use it, it's not really worth having it. And to be honest, I quite like the brake cleaner because you can squirt it into all the nooks and crannies and it gets all the dust and everything out. So probably not the most cost-effective way of doing it, but it does work really well. So we give that a pretty thorough degreasing. Then we'll give it a wipe over with that tap rag. If you haven't seen these before, or tap cloth some people call them, it's basically just a sticky rag. So give it a wipe round, and then any little particles or anything that have landed on it, it just picks those up. And there we go. That's ready to have some paint on it. Alright, now it's time to mix some paint. Now, as you've seen me using before, I just use disposable plastic drinking cups. You know, you can get your specific paint mixing cups with all your measurements and ratios on the side, but to be honest, I find these work just as well, especially because almost everything I do it on the scales, and the scales don't lie. So this stuff needs to be mixed 2 to 1. I don't know if you can hear it, there's a massive fly in here and it's buzzing around, doing my head in.
This fly, any fly, cannot be in our lab. It's a problem.
So we're going to put a bunch of that white in there. We're going to go for about 100 grams. There we go. You don't have to be super accurate with it, but the nearest few grams is fine. And then what I like to do is just chuck that lid back on there, stop any flies landing in it for a start. Then it's 2 to 1, so we need 50 grams of the hardener or activator. Thereabout. And then I'll give that a little bit of a whiz up. And then I've used this paint a few times. I've not used this colour, but this seems to work well. I'll put about an extra, about 10 grams or so of thinner in there. And then a little bit of the secret sauce, the good stuff. And that will be enough to do the backside of one of those front wheels. And that's a couple of coats on there, so it dries pretty quick, so you can basically put one on almost immediately after the other, and then it flows out and gives a nice good finish on there. A good rule of thumb, if you're ever mixing paint and you're not sure how thick or thin it should be, if you're spraying it, something that someone taught me many moons ago is try and get it to the same sort of consistency as milk. And as luck would have it, I'm currently swigging on a litre of Guernsey milk there, which is the best milk in the world. So, I mean, I don't need to pour you that out and show you what milk looks like, but yeah, good tip. Right, got my mask on, can't forget that. You don't want to get this stuff in your lungs. So I'm going to start by going round the outside, get a bit on there, a bit on the inside, give it a few minutes and then repeat the process. perfect for a first coat. I've got a tiny bit left in there, so I've got more in the pot, so that's enough to give it the same amount of paint again. I'm going to let that flash off for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll give it another one. And there we go, that's all of them with 2 decent coats on both sides. It's more than enough. Pretty happy with the finish on those, to say they're painted in the garden. Not bad at all. So next time someone tells you can't get a good finish painting outside, tell them to suck it and show them this video. Now those in a day or two are going to be dry enough to get the tyres on, put them on the car, put the hubcaps on, put it on the ground. Yes! Finally! Now I've just got to clean up all this mess. But you don't want to see that, so there's a quicker way. Haha! Well, I did pack everything away, and then I looked in the cupboard and I found some clear, and I thought, the clear coat finish is better than a single stage finish, so got all the gear out again, put the wheels back outside, and I've just put a good couple of coats of clear on there, and it's super shiny, so definitely made the right choice to do that. So what I'm going to do now is get the hell out of this shed so I don't kick up any dust, because this clear takes a while to go off. So I'm going to leave that overnight, come back, check it tomorrow, and yeah, really pleased with that. Again, not bad for being painted in the garden. Okay, with the wheels painted and looking awesome, there was only a couple more things left to do, and that was get the tyres mounted, get the wheels balanced, bolt them onto the chassis, roll it outside, and pat myself on the back for how cool it looks. But as you may be guessing as I'm talking, that didn't quite go to plan, unfortunately. I'm not quite sure how to explain this, so I'll start by showing you my workbench. That, believe it or not, is the nice shiny white paint from all 4 of my wheels. You might be thinking, how the hell did that happen? And last night, as I was ripping the stuff off in sheets, I was asking myself exactly the same question. Basically, the story goes, had the tyres mounted, they looked awesome. I was so excited to get them bolted on. I'll put a picture up of them now because, like I say, they just looked exactly how I wanted them to. As I was handling them to mount them to the car, I knocked one of the wheel weights on the back, which are, you know, little stuck on weights, and something didn't seem quite right. So I had a little bit of a poke, a little bit of a prod about, and I'm really glad I did, because what it uncovered was some serious adhesion issues between the top coat and the primer, which, I'll be honest, it came as a massive surprise to me, because I've used these paints and this process literally hundreds of times in the past. I've painted hot rod parts, motorcycle parts, boat parts, bicycle parts, everything you can name, and I've never had an issue even close to this. Now, after doing a little bit of research online, I think I've discovered what the problem is. Basically, apparently these epoxy primers, if you leave them too long until you apply the top coat, you can get sort of like a waxiness that brings itself to the surface. It's something to do with the catalyst in the primer. I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but apparently it's an issue that other people have had in the past, and to be honest, it tallies up. It makes perfect sense, because normally when I paint parts, they're top coated within a day or two after the primer is dried. You know, as soon as the primer's dry enough, I sand it all back, give it a top coat. I've done it loads of times and I've never had an issue. The stuff normally etches into it like crazy and you end up with a really durable part. Now this, obviously not so much. It does make sense, because I think I primed the wheels. They were all prepped and ready to go, but the white top coat hadn't actually arrived yet, and I think it was actually about 2 or 3 weeks until the top coat did get here. So in the meantime, I wrapped the wheels up in polythene and put them to one side in my shed so they didn't get covered in dust. And I think that may have actually made things worse, because any solvent or anything that was still trying to escape that primer obviously had nowhere to go. And basically whatever happened, it's wreaked havoc, and it's yeah, totally ruined my nice shiny paint job. I did think about editing this whole chunk of the video out, but full disclosure, I thought I'd leave it in because it's the harsh truth that with a project like this, not every aspect of it is going to go your way. At some point, something is going to go wrong. I can't pretend it doesn't suck. Clearly it does, but it could always be worse. It could be a lot better, but it could always be worse. So yeah, the tyres are back off, the wheels are back at the blasters. We're going to tackle them again next week, and I'm 99% sure I know how to avoid this happening again. It just means that unfortunately you're going to have to wait until the next video to see the thing on the floor, but that just gives you an excuse to come back next time. So instead of ending on this complete bummer, if you can cast your mind back to the video that came before this one, you'll remember that I did a prize giveaway for a Tamiya lunchbox radio controlled car. Again, it's not a sponsored video, it's something I've paid for out of my own pocket. It's my way of saying thank you to everybody that subscribes and watches and everything else. So I drew a name from a hat on an Instagram live video a few days ago, and the winner was Phil from Lincolnshire. So I've contacted Phil, we're going to get that truck sent to him in the post, and hopefully it puts him in a better mood than I'm currently in. So yeah, if you'll excuse me, I'm about to go and cry into a pile of paint all over my workshop floor. So you know what to do. Get yourself out in the garage, and if you're going to paint something, don't leave it 3 weeks until you top coat it. So we'll see you next time on Building a Beach Buggy. Thank you for watching.